And welcome to the Empowering You webinar for today. We do have as our guest speaker, Brooke Shipwright. Brooke is, I am getting back to where I have her biographical information. She is housing advocacy organizer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, where she mobilizes partners on federal policy advocacy and other organizing efforts. Before going to NLIHC, she spent time in Philadelphia supporting state and local coalitions. She was an MSW intern with the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia's Regional Housing Coordinator for Self-Determination Housing Project of Pennsylvania. She has a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from Nebraska Wesleyan University and an MSW from University of Pennsylvania. We love MSWs, so we're glad to have you on the call, Brooke. And it's been great to get to meet you here in Missouri as you have done some programming here. We look forward to having you speak at one of our annual events one of these days. That would be really great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. So here's how today's call is going to go. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it is that Empower Missouri has been doing lately, because we haven't got to do what we normally would do, which is, of course, working in our legislative session in order to pass some very good public policy about issues like hunger and housing and criminal justice. But we haven't got to do that because nothing is operating very normally right now. We would like to remind you that when you're not speaking, if you would mute your line, that would be great. Looks like just about everybody is doing that. It looks like a lot of people are practicing closing their video, which apparently helps us with some bandwidth things too. So good for all of you for practicing good Zoom etiquette. Obviously, you've been on a lot of Zoom calls. So I'm going to see what I can do about bringing up my slides and sharing my screen with you. Let's see if it lets me do that. Yeah. All right. So this is the webinar for April 9th. And we'd like to remind you of what our mission is. Are you all able to see my screen okay? All right, great. We work to secure basic human needs and equal justice for every person in our state through coalition building and advocacy. This is an update of our mission statement, our vision statement, and a value statement that our board passed not too long ago. So some of you may not be familiar with this language. We envision a Missouri in which all people have food, shelter, and justice. Wouldn't that be a great place to live? And values that undergird our work are adequate nutrition, affordable housing, and equal justice are essential for Missouri's success. All structural oppressions are recognized, challenged, and dismantled. Evidence-based public policy is foundational for those who govern, and the lawmaking process is truly accessible to all in our state. We take as our responsibility to make sure advocates in our state are informed about the social justice implications of legislation in both our General Assembly and the U.S. Congress on affordable housing and homelessness, criminal justice, economic justice, health and mental health, human rights, and hunger. So we haven't been able to do what we normally do. So what is it we've been up to? So we've been very busy actually during this public health emergency, and your voices have really mattered. For one thing, we held a briefing for Food Security Coalition members on March 17th and asked them at that time to immediately get in touch with Senators Blunt and Hawley. They were about to vote at that point on the Families First Coronavirus Response Action, which some call Stimulus 2.0. That Families First legislation included allowing SNAP or SNAP-like benefits for children in schools that are closed for more than 5 days, establishing additional SNAP flexibilities in public health emergency, suspending SNAP's 3-month time limit, expanding flexibilities for school meals and summer food service program, and strengthening WIC and commodities assistance. So all of those things were in the 2.0 bill, and both Senators Blunt and Hawley voted for them, as did 6 out of 8 of our congressional members. Long and Smith voted no, but the other folks all voted yes. So you might let your legislators at the federal level know that you thank them if they voted yes on that. And then the CARES Act also happened, and it contained a number of things related to housing that Brooke, I think, is going to tell you some things about later. So I'm not going to go into that. But we're now starting to talk to our legislators about the fourth stimulus package. And we want that to include a 15% SNAP funding increase. We also want to suspend all SNAP rule changes and work hour documentation requirements indefinitely. We want to help state and local governments centralize and widely distribute information about schools, school districts, and the child and adult care food program sites that are open during school closures. We want to increase the minimum SNAP benefit from $16 to $30. A lot of seniors won't go to the trouble of applying for SNAP if all you can get is $16. It used to be $15, I think not too long ago it was raised to $16. And it's just a whole lot of hassle to get a tiny amount of money like that. But they maybe could be helped to apply if they knew that they would get at least $30, and they might get more than that. So we're hoping that that will help some seniors apply. Extend the pandemic electronic benefit transfer program through the summer months or the length of the pandemic. Expand by law the USDA online SNAP purchasing pilot program to all states and US territories. Allow for off-site meal delivery services like mobile feeding programs and backpack meal programs. Eliminate USDA administrative red tape that slows the approval of state SNAP and child nutrition waivers and PEBT plans, and fund nutrition assistance for Puerto Rico and territories. I didn't manage to paste that whole line there for you, but that's what that was supposed to be. I've accidentally skipped ahead just a little bit here. So there is a call to action on that. We want you to be reaching out to Senator Blunt and to Senator Hawley. You can also reach out to your US congressional member, but we think it will be especially important to reach out to our senators. You can join in calling for a 15% increase in SNAP, and you can get into some of those other points from slide 6 if you'd like to. If you want to know more about how to write a letter or an email to them, or what words to put into a phone call with them, you can see the joint statements section on our website at www.empowermissouri.org. Pick the news and updates tab, and then you'll see joint statements, and you'll see something we've signed on to with national partners, just a lot of them. I think it's the document has more than a dozen pages, most of which is just organization after organization that are calling for these same things together. And you can find phone numbers for Senator Blunt's regional offices on his website, and you can find an email contact form on Senator Hawley's website. He was not as forthcoming about listing all of his regional offices and how to dial into them. There also have been a number of things that we've asked for regarding TANF. Suspending the work hour documentation requirements, stopping all sanctions and terminations, counting only what people's income is now instead of looking back on what it might have been a while back, because if you go based on what people put on their taxes last year, that may not be very accurate now, since so many people have lost hours or lost whole jobs for now. So we want them to base it on their continuing income, not their past income. And we want to eliminate barriers to re-entry or entry into the program, like face-to-face interviews. We'd love to see one-time payments to TANF families, because these families are very, very low income and they need help with the cost of things to sanitize with, for example. And we want to provide more emergency assistance or other one-time payments for TANF families. I am talking with Caitlin Whaley at the Department of Social Services. She's their governmental liaison. She said that the suspension of work requirements has happened. I could not get answers about all of the things going on, because she's just basically overwhelmed, as are a whole lot of state employees right now. So I certainly can give her some grace and not being real detailed and telling me what all had been done. But the work requirements are not being imposed on people on TANF right now. So if you know someone who's lost work and they have children, urge them to apply for TANF. It might be some additional help for their families. We've done a lot of work on housing security as well. Sorry, this keeps jumping ahead. I'm not sure what I'm doing. We'll learn most of this from Brooke, but we do have an action alert up on our website right now. There's the link to it, and it allows you to send a message to Governor Parson and to your state legislators about keeping people stably housed with emergency rent and mortgage assistance, and having a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, funding direct service not-for-profits and public housing authorities so they can better sanitize their spaces and serve their customers, their consumers, banning utility shutoffs. A lot of the municipalities already have that going on, but we would like that to be statewide, and funding to immediately house all persons experiencing homelessness and provide them sanitation and restroom facilities for people experiencing homelessness. I read a while ago about a city that had drawn spaces 6 feet apart for people to sleep on a parking lot. But if that's the least we can do for people who are homeless, that really is a least that we can do kind of thing. It's a very small thing. We also have right now some advocacy going on about prisons and jails. We have a sign-on letter that folks can sign on to through 5 p.m. today. And it's up on our website under the Joint Statements page. You reply to Christine, who is our lead person on criminal justice matters, Christine at empowermissouri.org. It asks Governor Parson and the Department of Corrections Director Ann Precythe to take 6 actions. One is to look for those incarcerated persons who are 60 or older, or people who are immune compromised and meet the requirements for compassionate release and grant them release. We'd like to identify those who are near the end of their sentence and get them out of incarceration and into house arrest using electronic monitoring or other measures for the balance of their incarceration. As you can probably guess, prisons would be a very hard place to keep the transmission of COVID-19 down if it got started there. Number 3 is, sorry for the jumping around, identify persons currently incarcerated due to a technical violation and immediately release them, again, using house arrest, electronic monitoring, etc. Halt all arrest and detentions for technical violations of probation and parole, and suspend in-person meeting requirements. Identify persons who've completed 3 years of supervision and transfer that person to administrative supervision or terminate their supervision, and suspend fines and fees. And then allow and encourage those with families and loved ones who can house them to be directly housed with their families, even if it's public housing. You may know that the Federal Welfare Reform Law of 1996 made it where a lot of people with drug felonies can never be in public housing. And so we'd like that rule to be chucked while there's a need for people to be sheltered. We'd like that rule to be chucked, period. We fought it in 1996. Well, we thought it was a bad idea then, and it still is. If you are part of an organization, this is an organizational sign-on, not an individual sign-on letter. But if you're part of an organization that wants to sign on to that, let Christine know by 5 o'clock today, because we're sending the letter to Director Precythe and Governor Parson tomorrow. Our next webinar will be on the 23rd, and we'll make it relevant to whatever is going on then. In the meantime, you can be on our affordable housing call next Monday at 2, our smart sentencing call next Friday the 17th at 11, or there's a St. Louis Friday forum on protecting voting rights that will be done by Zoom at noon that day. You can find information about all of those on our website, and there's some information about how to find me. Let me see. What I wanted to do was to show you where to find some of these things on our website. Let me see if I can share my screen with you again while I show you a couple of these things here. What's back there? Well, let's see. I guess I have to minimize this for you to see it maybe. Now, can you see my whole the Empowering You website? No, cannot. Thank you for shaking your head, Brooke. That's helping me a lot. I think you probably still can't see all of it, right? Can you see it, Brooke? Yes, can see it? No, you cannot see it. Okay, well, I'm just gonna have to leave you on your own probably to manage that part, because I can't seem to manage to get to my to get to my screen. And well, let's try clicking on here first and then see what happens. I think every time what happens is you wind up seeing the picture. Well, now can you see it? There we go. All right, great. So if you pick news and updates, you can go to joint statements, and that will let you go down and pick a copy of a joint statement we did on incarcerated youth and COVID-19, measures to ensure voting. And then we have the April sign-on letter. That's the one that shows you what you can sign on to that Christine is collecting names on. And then if you're wanting to contact Blond and Hawley about SNAP, you find that SNAP letter to President Trump and the SNAP letter to U.S. House and Senate there that can help you with your language. You also can go to news and updates and pick call to action, and it will take you to a page that lets you edit an email that will go to your legislators. It would go to Governor Parson and to your Missouri House and Senate member, and it lets you personalize your message. Do edit it so that it's in your own words, change the subject line, change the wording of it at least a little bit there, because letters that don't look like form letters get far better attention, and I think that will make those more effective. But you're welcome to use those resources. Are we back to you not seeing my screen, I hope? Okay, very good. Representative Burnett, could you unmute yourself and say a little bit about what happened in the state legislature this week? That would be very helpful to us, I think.
There we go. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So basically what we did was yesterday, the Senate on Tuesday put together a bill for the supplemental budget that would allow the governor tremendous latitude in providing support for all of the various relief efforts for COVID-19 crisis and pandemic. So I think maybe what I will do is just kind of go through and talk a little bit about things that you, a lot of what you talked about are covered in there, but some were not. So our staff did a fabulous job of giving us a good brief, but the brief is like 5 pages, 6 pages long. So I don't want to go through the whole thing. So we appropriated funding for DESE and for higher ed. These had to do more around stabilizing the schools for DESE, and higher ed had to do, again, more with stabilization and keeping them able to function. The community colleges also got some appropriation for funding. There was funding provided from MoDOT, and I'm not going to go into these, but these have to do with non-urbanized transit grants. The larger cities that have transit operations will apply directly, but for the smaller municipalities, these come through the state, and that money would get funneled through this CARES Act. Also, the local governments, the larger local governments, St. Louis and Kansas City, basically were appropriated $5 billion, I believe, and we are not clear. The problem is we're not clear whether or not some of these funds will be provided directly to the cities. The cities go directly to the federal government, or if they have to be funneled through the state budget. So some of these things that were put in as a just in case, not necessarily that they will actually be used because they may be distributed through another mechanism. We just wanted to be sure that we gave the governor every vehicle he needed in order to get these funds out to the agencies who need them. I think of particular interest to to the group here are that we identified that we wanted to prioritize certain funding for DMH to go to crisis counseling, suicide prevention, and a pandemic stipend for DMH employees. The thinking being that they are putting themselves at an increased risk of exposure. Also, we identified funds for HIV/AIDS assistance, rural health and primary care programs, and meals and supportive services to the area agencies on aging. In the Department of Social Services, we identified earmarked appropriations for homeless assistance, food distribution programs, domestic violence victim programs, and then child care workers, essential child care workers. We also identified areas in corrections, particularly pandemic stipend for correction employees, because obviously they have to go to work. And I think the other piece I want to put in there would be that they describe this as a belt and suspenders approach, that money was appropriated through general revenue. Money was also appropriated through federal funds. The thinking being that since we're not really clear whether the money comes directly through the federal funds, we would have GR available if needed, and then that could possibly be replaced through the federal funds, depending on how the kind of guidance that we get from the federal government. It is still really a jumbled mix and difficult to navigate through. And I wish I could give you more specific information or even tell you who has it. But at this point, we're depending a lot on the federal government.
All right, well, thank you so much for giving us an overview of the supplemental budget debate that you all had. I didn't think that you would mind me just calling on you. You have joined our calls before, and
sure,
I know that you're, as my mama would say, a person who can be ready in season and out. So,
well, I appreciate it.
The biblical reference there, probably.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Representative Burnett. All right, are there any questions for me or maybe even for Representative Burnett before we move on to hearing about what's going on around housing at the federal level? And not just at the federal level, and that Representative Burnett has made it clear that our main source of help right now is the federal government, and that will impact how a lot of things on housing go here in Missouri. So what Brooke brings us, even though it's national information, is going to shape our context here in Missouri. Any questions for me? Let's see if there's anything in the chat box here. I think not yet. All right. Representative Burnett, is the number for homelessness funding still around $30 million in the final bill? Do you have information on that? It's a question for Lee Camp. Lee, you're at EHOC now, is that right?
I am looking through my notes here. It is homeless assistance.
Yeah.
Okay, 30 million in federal funds through the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. CARES Act provides funding to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus among individuals and families who are homeless or receiving homeless assistance, and to support additional homeless assistance and homelessness prevention activities to mitigate the impact created by the COVID-19 crisis. So what we appropriated through this bill was 30 million.
Okay, All right, great, thank you. And sorry, Lee, I thought Arch City Defenders when I first said your name, and then when the topic was homelessness, I talked myself out of it. I think you used to maybe be at either EHOC or Legal Services, and I got to know you somewhere else first, so I'm still getting your new organization associated with your name and face in my head. All right, well, we'll come back and see some other questions later, but let us go on to receiving information that, that Brooke can share. We've been very worried about housing and the coronavirus pandemic, because it's not like we didn't have a problem before. We already had an affordable housing crisis in our state, and we already had a lot of things that weren't working as well as they needed to be in our state, and the pandemic has certainly put a big bright yellow highlighter on a bunch of them. So thank you very much for joining us today, Brooke, and we will look forward to learning from you and then asking you some questions at the end.
Great.
I will mute myself in the meantime.
Okay, everyone can hear me okay first?
Yes.
Okay, and you can see my screen? Okay, great. So thanks again for having me today. I'm happy to be with you all, and thanks to everyone who took time to join. I want to spend most of the time today sharing what's in the recent federal COVID-19 response package called the CARES Act. And then I'm going to turn to what we're pushing for in the next package and how you can participate in taking action on that. Before we dive into what's in the package, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone on this call today who spent time contacting your members of Congress for the last package. Without all of your help, you know, we couldn't have done this without you to ensure that housing and homelessness resources were included in the CARES Act. And so I'm just going to see if I can forward. So the CARES Act provided 12, here, just one second, I'm gonna pull up something for myself. You're still seeing my PowerPoint, correct? Okay, great. So the CARES Act included $12 billion in affordable housing and homelessness resources. This is truly a significant victory for NLIHC and our Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition. Our goal with that coalition is to ensure that people with the greatest needs are protected during this crisis, and it couldn't have been done without all of your support, like I said. But we still have a lot more work to do as this crisis unfolds. NLIHC and the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition and its 850 organizational members will continue to push for the resources and policies that are needed to keep people experiencing homelessness safe and healthy, and ensure that low-income renters are stably housed. So let's just get into what was in the CARES Act. Before we get into what's still needed, I think it's important to take a moment to celebrate that and talk about what's in it and what that means for your communities. And so the CARES Act was $6 trillion total. 12 billion of that was in affordable housing and homelessness resources. This includes resources for housing providers, low-income renters, homelessness services, and more. So I'm going to dive right into what those details are. I'm going to go fairly quickly over these things, reviewing what was in our analysis of the CARES Act, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end as I'm able to, or always happy to go to our policy team to get information on anything that I can't answer today. So the first major piece is the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures that was included in the CARES Act. All federally backed mortgages have a foreclosure moratorium for 60 days beginning on March 18th. And these owners may request forbearance up to 180 days with the option to extend for another 180 days upon their request. For multifamily housing owners, they may also request forbearance up to 30 days with an option to extend another 60 days. The eviction moratorium affects renters in homes that are covered by federally backed mortgages for 120 days since the enactment of the CARES Act. And renters in federally subsidized apartments are also included, and specifically those that are in programs supported by HUD, USDA, and Treasury, which is the low-income housing tax credit development. And I'll get into this later, but there are state and localities who are also pushing for their own moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures. And so what we're pushing for next is a uniform one so that people don't have to navigate this complicated system. The next piece is the Emergency Solutions Grant, which Representative Burnett mentioned. There was $4 billion total in the CARES Act. And this can be used to prevent an outbreak among sheltered and unsheltered people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. It also includes, can be used for eviction prevention assistance, staff costs, training, and hazard pay for people who are working a lot of extra shifts and hours right now to protect people and make sure that that people are safe in the shelters. And let's see, there's a waiver that was included, which many providers were asking for, which allows the typical cap on shelter services is removed. So all of this can be used for temporary emergency shelters. There's no match requirements, and it also allows for previous fiscal year ESG funds to be used for these purposes as well to respond to coronavirus. It's going to be distributed, the first $2 billion or up to $2 billion are distributed according to fiscal year 20 allocations within 30 days. I may be behind on where we're at with this, but last I heard was that HUD was indicating that they were going to approve $1 billion for the fiscal year 20 allocation, or using that fiscal year 20 formula for within 30 days of enactment. And then the remaining that's left over from that will be distributed within 90 days to communities with the greatest needs. That formula is yet to be determined and will be determined by HUD. Some potential criteria that will be included in that is the risk of transmission, the rates of cases, a number of unsheltered and sheltered homeless populations, and economic and housing market conditions. And then next up is the Community Development Block Grant. So that had $5 billion total. $2 billion goes to states and units of local governments under the fiscal year 20 formula. And $1 billion goes directly to states and insular areas based on public health needs, risk of transmission, number of cases, economic and housing market disruptions. And then the other $2 billion goes to states and units of local government based on the prevalence and risk of COVID-19 and related economic and housing disruptions from COVID-19. So you can kind of see a similar pattern between these first two pieces, how they're distributed. These can be used, as many of you know, community development block grants are flexible funds, and additional flexibility was added to address COVID-19 needs. There's a potential to use it for emergency rental assistance or to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness. We're still trying to gain some clarity on if that's possible, but we'll talk about another source towards the end of this that could also be used for that as well. It eliminates the spending cap on public services and the requirement to hold in-person public hearings, since we're all social distancing right now and want to get these funds out as quickly as possible. It allows grantees to be reimbursed for COVID-19 response activities and to combine prior year funds for responding to the pandemic. So tenant-based rental assistance received $1.25 billion total, and this will be used to help public housing agencies maintain normal operations and take other necessary actions to respond to COVID-19. So you know, a lot of tenants are facing a loss of income right now, and to make sure that public housing agencies can still maintain their properties and you know, meet operational costs that they would normally get from rent. This is where that is going to. So 850 million is a combination of administrative costs and other expenses to maintain health and safety and retain support of participating landlords. And then 400 million is, like what I was saying, to adjust the renewal funding and voucher per unit costs as families lose income. So that's so that they will not have to cut people off of the program. The distribution will be based on need. Again, a formula yet to be determined by HUD. So a few other programs. First is the project-based rental assistance. Oh, sorry.
These are national numbers, right?
They are. Yeah.
None of these are Missouri numbers at this point. Someone had asked in the chat box on that. I thought it would prevent a little confusion to ask you.
Yes, good question. Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't more clear before. We're still waiting for a lot of these funds to be released. So some of them were explicitly stated how much states would get, or the minimum that states would get. But right now we don't know exactly what that will look like. For project-based rental assistance, there will be $1 billion to maintain normal operations again, and take other necessary actions to keep people safe. For public housing, it's $685 million to go to their operating fund. Again, very similar here, to maintain normal operations and take necessary actions like cleaning and protective gear and stuff like that. This allows PHAs, or public housing authorities, to combine its capital and operating funds through 2020, the calendar year, to respond to COVID-19, and if needed, they can request to extend another 12 months. The Native American housing programs received $300 million total to address tribal needs. $200 million of that goes to the Native American housing block grants using the fiscal 20 formula, so last year's formula, and then up to $100 million is going to the Indian Community Development Block Grant to prioritize, you know, responses to COVID-19. HOPWA, which is Housing for Persons with AIDS, received $65 million to address operations, rental assistance, and other needed actions. 50 million of that is using last year's fiscal year 20 formula, and then up to 10 million is going to one-time non-renewable grants to permanent supportive housing providers, including uses for rent, mortgage, and utilities. And then finally, or two more slides maybe. So 50 million is going to Section 202, Housing for the Elderly. This includes 10 million to support service coordinators and continue, you know, their protective gear and continue their work as possible. 15 million goes to Section 811, Housing for Persons with Disabilities, and 2.5 million for fair housing activities. Unfortunately, USDA did not receive any funds to support their properties, but we are working with our partners who do rural housing work to make sure that that's included in the next spending package. And then finally, I'll just say that unemployment insurance and the disaster relief fund. Unemployment insurance is important because, as you all know, there was a great need, you know, many people struggling to make ends meet before this crisis. Now we're seeing even more. And so the unemployment insurance will be critical to help people get by, but we're still pushing for rental assistance and other supports to make sure people aren't just getting by, but they're stably housed. There was $45 billion for the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund, which is the primary funding source for FEMA disaster recovery programs. So states like Missouri, who have major disaster declarations, will receive money through this fund for programs that fall under FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund. Additional 200 million was provided to emergency food and shelter, the emergency food and shelter program, and this is administered through local service organizations. And lastly, this is similar to the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG. The Coronavirus Relief Fund was created for a flexible fund specifically for coronavirus response work. 150 billion was allocated to this new fund for state, tribal, and local governments to help broadly cover any quote necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency created by the current pandemic. So from that 150 billion, there's $3 billion to territorial governments and DC. 8 billion was reserved for tribal governments, and at least 1.25 billion will go to each state. These are supposed to be released within 30 days to states based on their relative populations, and can be separated out to provide funding directly to local governments, but cannot be used to replace, already allocated state funds. Like I said, there's a very broad nature of these funds, very flexible. They could be used to help address the needs of people experiencing homelessness and unstably housed low-income renters who are impacted by the pandemic. So we've definitely encouraged people to advocate for these funds and the other flexible funds in this CARES Act at the state and local level to make sure that these funds are used for rental assistance and other emergency housing needs during this time when possible. So that $12 billion is great. It's a large amount of money and we're excited about it, but it's still not enough to meet the need. And so there is more work ahead. So before I get into the specifics of what we're asking for the next response package, I just want to point out that we have a new Legislative Action Center on our website at nlihc.org/take-action. The link is here on your screen, and I'll be sure to share this PowerPoint out with everyone so you can have that link to click on and all of this information. But that takes you to all of the legislative priorities that we're tracking right now, as well as coronavirus, an action button and information there. So for the next federal response to COVID-19, what we're recommending, we kind of put it into buckets to make it a little easier to digest because the need is so great and there's a lot of need out there. So it kind of puts it into 3 or 4 pieces for each bucket. So the most urgent need is for ESG, Emergency Solutions Grants, which we talked about. A recent study was done by some researchers that, I'm just pulling up my notes here, some researchers that found that people who are homeless and contract the virus are twice as likely to be hospitalized, 2 to 4 times as likely to require critical care, and 2 to 3 times as likely to die than others in the general public. And this study found that the need was $15.5 billion to meet the need through ESG funds. And so with Congress providing $4 billion in ESG in the CARES Act, we're asking for the remaining $11.5 billion to go to ESG. And then we're also asking, like I said before, for a national uniform moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. It's really challenging and nearly impossible for people to find whether they are living, renting a property in a federally, from someone who has a federally backed mortgage. So that alone is not sufficient, and really it creates a lot of confusion. And then you layer on the state moratoria and local ones that we're seeing pop up here and there, and it's just a patchwork. And there's a lot of people who are going to fall through the cracks in this. And so if we have a uniform moratorium, it eliminates that confusion and assures us that we won't lose our homes during this crisis. So the last one for the most urgent needs is $100 billion for emergency rental assistance. We just put out an analysis recently on where this number comes from. Our research team would be able to tell you much more than I can, but they looked at what the need was for extremely low and very low income renters before this crisis, and then took numbers from the last crisis, economic crisis, and used projections of what the extremely low and very low income cost burden renters are going to be, and projected that it's going to be $100 billion for in need for emergency rental assistance. And we're really okay with various ways that this money can, different vehicles for this money. It can be through a combination of emergency solutions grants, housing choice vouchers, Section 521 rural rental assistance, or other disaster housing assistance programs. This last one, disaster housing assistance program, is also referred to as DHAP, and that was used by past Republican and Democratic administrations to address short-term rental assistance needs after previous natural disasters. So the next bucket is additional resources and needed policies. We're also pushing for a moratorium on sweeps of homeless encampments. The CDC has advised localities not to sweep homeless encampments or force people to relocate if they don't have if they don't have any other options available. This can just, spread the disease further. It's not helpful. So we're really pushing for that. And then secondly is additional emergency funds for public housing and other HUD housing providers to continue to serve the people they're serving, and possibly expand upon that. But they really need that support to keep residents safe and healthy during this crisis. And in that, we're including USDA rural housing providers. And then the last one under this bucket is access to legal services and housing counseling. These are needed to protect tenants from unlawful evictions that may occur after any moratoriums are lifted, or if none are put into effect in certain areas. And housing counseling can help renters and homeowners remain stably housed during and after this pandemic. And then the last bucket is priorities for economic stimulus. And this is kind of the long-term thinking to address the underlying causes of homelessness, to eliminate the risks for future outbreaks. So increasing investments in the National Housing Trust Fund, increasing money to the public housing capital funds for much needed repairs, and expanding rental assistance, whether it's in the form of housing choice vouchers, or creating a targeted renters tax credit. These are needed to keep people stably housed and dedicate more of their incomes for other essentials like food, medicine, education, and transportation. And then lastly, we want to prevent evictions by creating a new emergency assistance fund. There is one proposed by Senators Michael Bennet and Rob Portman from Colorado and Ohio in a bipartisan bill called the Eviction Crisis Act. And we're really pushing for that to help, have that already established for future crises that we might see. And the last one, which I failed to put here on this slide because I missed it on my sheet here, but is expand and reform the low-income housing tax credit, and pair with reforms, as many of you know, to that are currently in Congress to allow the program to better reach people with the greatest needs. And then today we just put out a call to action to our network. And so congressional leadership unveiled proposals for the next coronavirus package, I believe today, or it might have been last night, which does not include any funding to address housing and homelessness needs. So we're gonna have to rally again, and we need your support in doing that, to contact your representatives and senators and urge them to weigh in with leadership to let them know that housing and homelessness resources are in fact needed in the next package, so that people with the lowest incomes are protected. We have weekly national calls. If you haven't heard, they're on Mondays, every Monday from 1:30 to 3 Central Time. And I included the link here where you can register. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a Contact Your Members Today link. So when this goes out, you can find that link and it will take you directly to our Take Action page to contact your members. And like Gimo said before, definitely tweak it to be in your own words, edit the subject, edit the language, create, add in your personal perspective. That's always more effective. And one way to do that is to look at state and local data that we have. I guess it was just last month, it feels like a year ago, we released this year's gap report. And, you know, none of it was really surprising to us because the need is still very much there. In this year, the numbers for Missouri are over 200,000 extremely low-income renter households in your state, with 42, just 42 affordable and available rental homes for every 100 extremely low-income renter households. So that means that there's units of affordable, but they're also not taken by higher income households. And then there's 70% of extremely low-income renter households with severe cost burden. So I'm happy to take any questions. I've been seeing the chat box pop up here and there. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I'm happy to answer questions.
I think the main one that you've had so far is from Kyra in Kansas City, saying are these funds for current public housing tenants, or are there other non-housing tenants that are homeless who could receive assistance? I think that was maybe about emergency assistance for rental, but Kyra can unmute herself and say more about that if I haven't got the slant of the question right.
Yes, that was correct.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so they are specifically the funds for going towards public housing and rental assistance, the tenant-based rental assistance and stuff. That's going directly to the housing provider so that they can continue to pay the portion of rent that make up the difference. So how those work, people typically spend 30% of their incomes, whether they're in a project-based rental assistance or if it's tenant-based and they have housing choice vouchers, it's always paying 30%. Well, they're seeing a loss of job right now, a loss of income. And so that the Public Housing Authority is having to make up that difference, and to make sure that everyone can continue in that program, that's where these funds are going. So it's not, unfortunately, not helping new people who don't have assistance right now. But, for now it's so that we're not having to cut the program.
Okay. And Elizabeth asked whether my slides and Brooke's would be made available. Yes, we'll have them on our website, but I haven't learned exactly where they reside yet to tell you that. I don't know if Rico can unmute and answer that question, or in any case, if you email me at Jeanette with one N, JEANETTE @empowermissouri.org, I'll be glad to mail you directly my slides and Brooke's. And Jessica said, is any of the money open enough that it can go to undocumented migrants as well struggling with, who are also struggling with housing now?
Yeah.
She's guessing
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, so we're, it's a little unclear. I think right now it's probably no, but we're looking at how we can make sure that they're included. And we are currently putting together, that should be available by the end of this week, if not early next week, an FAQ page, frequently asked questions, including some information about people who are undocumented and where they fit into all of this.
JMO, can you hear me?
Yes, Rico.
Okay, so if you were to go to our Empower Missouri page, go to where it says events, and you'll see where it says Empowering You, COVID-19 state and federal policy presentation. You click on that, and it'll take you to where you can find the slides. Brooke, if you
Okay.
would email JMO your slides, I can put them on the website. JMO, your slides are already on the website at this
Okay,
point,
cool.
so you guys will be able to find hers currently. I would add Brooke's also add the audio from this webinar.
Great. I will
Excellent. Thank you,
send
Rico.
them immediately after we get off today's call.
All right. And some of you may not have met Rico yet. Rico is our new communications director. We're so glad to have him. He started on March the 2nd. It's sort of like starting at the post office at Christmas. You know, you just never know what's going to happen when suddenly our world is in a public health emergency and you're starting a new job. So welcome, Rico.
Yeah, welcome, Rico.
Other questions for Brooke?
Hey, Brooke, I have a question. The FEMA Disaster Relief Fund money, the $45 billion there, is there any way, can you expand a little bit on what the purpose of that funding is?
Yeah, let me.
Is there a way for us to advocate for that to go towards housing? You may not have an answer to that.
Yeah. So we're also putting together a toolkit, and I was just getting ready to put in the chat box where you can sign up for NLIHC email updates, where we'll share all of these tools that I'm talking about that are forthcoming. So I'll send that. And yes, you can definitely advocate for those funds to be used where it's needed. I'm just pulling out my notes here to see if there's any specifics. But what I was going to say is that we're putting together a toolkit on better understanding FEMA and how the Disaster Relief Fund works and where you fit into this as far as like who to advocate to and what's allowed, like what these programs do. Kind of, you know, a lot of groups are new to the whole FEMA thing, including myself.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we have our disaster housing recovery team who's very knowledgeable about all of this and would be happy to answer questions you might have. But definitely look out for that toolkit first.
Okay.
It should also be ready by the end of this week or early next week. So these FEMA disaster recovery programs include federal assistance to states, municipalities, and tribes. I said that. So they have public assistance and individual assistance. I'm pretty sure they're fairly flexible. Again, I don't know a ton about it, but I'm happy to look up some resources and share those with JMO so she can share out to you all.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions for Brooke or for me, for that matter?
I've got one more.
Sure, go ahead.
A pragmatic understanding of what's going on around the country, maybe, particularly with the relief funds. Like we just had the overview of how the state has allocated them. What are you seeing in terms of coalition building at the state level to put pressure on, like for us, the governor is going to have a lot of autonomy to push that money out. To me, it makes sense. We all have state housing financing agencies. We need to press on it to go there, and then that be used for rental assistance and things to the like. Are we seeing anything that's working around the country? I've been on these webinars pretty much, it feels like, for the past 2 weeks. A consistent answer on what's working there yet. I didn't know if y'all have heard of anything that may be for your policy team as well.
Sure. Yeah, I know some states are kind of replicating what we're doing at the national level by holding, weekly or biweekly calls to update on their networks on information and kind of make a plan for who they should be targeting on the state and local level. And I know in Louisiana, for example, they've experienced a lot of disasters before and are trying to get out ahead of these funds, not waiting for them to come, but start laying that groundwork so they're talking to their governor, they're talking to the local city councils or other local governments and talking about the need of affordable housing, before this crisis and how this crisis is, making it even worse, but making the need greater. So really just kind of laying the groundwork of what the need is and pointing out a few ways of where these funds are flexible to address that. And so that once these funds are in their hands, they can have that in mind to move forward.
All right. And Chrissy has posted in the chat box the link. It shows you where to find where my slides are now and where Brooke's will be later. And we would like to thank Lee for the good job testifying against Hardy Billington's bill that would make it faster to evict people. There were several folks that testified the night of that hearing, and we appreciate all of you. If there's somebody else on the call whose face I can't see right now, feel free to unmute yourself and say, I was also one of the folks who helped to beat back that bad legislation. It's the only thing that we can console ourselves about around this legislative session is some bad bills will die because of running out of time because of the postponement of the General Assembly meeting. But unfortunately, we were making real progress on a number of good things, and we're very sad that we may not be able to get those through this year. But Lee, I really appreciated you coming so far to testify in a committee that only lets you testify for something like 30 seconds generally. I mean,
It gave me like 4 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. They let the sort of like a champion on the issue speak for 2 minutes or maybe a little more if the committee wants to ask some questions. But the rest of you are on kind of speed dating in that committee, and you get like 30 seconds. So it's a long drive for a little bit of time. All right. Any other questions?
JMO, I just, sorry, I was slight correction here about where the slides will be located. I just included the link in the chat box.
Okay.
It's going to be in the presentation. So the title is the same, but it says a presentation at the end of the link.
Okay.
So there's two different, basically, I guess you can say 2 different events. One is this event, and then the other one is where we're going to put the slides and the audio. And everyone should have that in their chat. The link to the slides and where the audio will be. So if you look at that, you'll be able to find that.
All right, great. And do poke around on our website a bit because there's a lot of good stuff there. If you want to know what was said about those nutrition assistance programs back on March 17th when we had that special meeting, if you go to the coalitions tab and pick Food Security Coalition, you can go to a place where you can get the recording for that particular event. That included some slides. So you may be able to find a lot of things that you care about if you play with our website. It gets better all the time. When Connor was our communications director, he made a lot of improvements, and Rico has added some other improvements. So we are trying to be one of those continually improving not-for-profits and hope that we make ourselves very useful to you.
JMO, I don't know if you think it would be useful, but I could copy you and show where these a couple of resources live on our website if you think that would be helpful to folks.
Sure.
Okay, if I can get it to work here.
All right.
Okay. You're seeing my...
I can see your screen.
NLIHC?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if you go to our website, NLIHC.org, and you scroll down, one of the first things you'll see here is our COVID-19 page. You click Learn More. And that takes you to, we're still working on making it easier to navigate because there's a lot of information out there. We initially started tracking all of the evictions and foreclosure moratoriums out there at the state and local level, and then that got to be very overwhelming. So we didn't, so we're trying to restructure it so it's easier to navigate, like I said, but you can click here, join the Disaster Recovery Housing Coalition, and sign up for their updates in addition to our NLIHC updates like I shared before. This is a good way to stay up to date on what's happening specifically around COVID-19 and housing and homelessness issues. So this is where we'll post some top news, where you can find our weekly webinars. We have all of the recordings here of previous ones we've done, and then you can register right here at the end of this paragraph for future ones. And then we have our congressional recommendations, which I mentioned. If you click on requests here, that will take you to a page, a web page with all of the new recommendations I spoke about. And it also provides a printable PDF version of that if you want, if you have any, we don't have a lot of in-person meetings happening right now, but if you have purposes to share that with folks, that would be great. You can also click here to find your members of Congress, to call them, like JMO said, to, you have the call to action for your senators, and what JMO was talking about, but this action will find also your representatives, and so that you can call or email them about these issues. Again, just some easy materials we have. This is where we'll be updating with the FAQ and the FEMA toolkit, and then the rest, I believe, is mostly field, kind of national and field updates about what's happening. So we will continue to update these as much as possible. And then I'll just quickly take you to, again, if you're visiting NLIHC.org and you go to Take Action, this is where you'll find our new Legislative Action Center. We were working on this for quite a while and weren't able to release until after COVID-19 started taking place here. And so we're still working on getting it in a more usable more information added, but the bare bones are here. And so you'll find COVID-19 response. It provides a description, some resources such as our recommendations for for Congress to take. And then you can click the Take Action button, and that will take you to our call to action where you fill out the form that will bring up your members of Congress in both chambers, and then you can edit this message here to them, and this includes our recommendations. So yeah, it's always good to know where you can find these things.
Right, excellent. Well, thank you. And I might also point out for those that need to know, what's happening with the Department of Social Services. Let me see if, well, it looks like I can't figure out how to do that. Well, maybe. Can you see the Department of My DSS? Okay, there we go. So most of the state websites these days have COVID-19 information on them. So when you go to the Department of Social Services website, you have the chance to go to their COVID-19 response page, and it'll let you go to updates like from the Family Support Division that will tell you like some of the things around the food stamp program, what the rule changes are. If you well, I'm having trouble getting it to slide down. But in any case, that's where you can find out how to apply for food stamps or TANF, how to apply for Medicaid. There are a number of things that people need to apply for these days, and updates about the programs are there as well, including which waivers have been approved. So do make use of that. There's a similar page for the Department of Corrections for those on this call, like Kyra, that are part of our criminal justice issues team. And it lets you know what the new things that are happening in our prisons. They are changing a lot of policies. We all actually should be very thankful to prisoners right now who are hard at work making masks. I don't know if you know, the factories in our prisons are turning out a lot of masks. They have changed a lot of the procedures there to try to put more distance between the prisoners, but we continue to be very worried about that situation. So do go to the agency websites for each of the departments of government. As you see up there, it's find an agency. It can let you, figure out the other state agencies, and then a lot of them have a special banner that says COVID-19 that tells you what's going on. If you haven't checked out an agency that matters to you, there may be some very helpful information for you, including some of those frequently asked question pages to fill you in. Are there any other questions that folks have? Oh, you're welcome, Kyra. We're always glad to have you on. All right, well, we had allocated to 2:30 today if we needed it, but we don't need to just hang out together, although the extroverts like me would probably be glad to just have you stay and chat with me for another 20 minutes, because that's how I am. I don't like this having to stay away from people stuff. So I told a telemedicine person, I had a meeting on Monday with a doctor that I had to cancel my appointment with, and I apologized for how much I chatted at the end of it and said, you know, I'm ready to talk to a wrong number right now. So that's how some of us are about these things.
Yep. Well, thank you again for having me, and thanks everyone for getting on. Please feel free to reach out anytime.
All right, so we'll see you again on April 23rd with an update. If something happens that we feel like we need to call a special call for any of our coalitions or for our membership in general, we will, and you'll get that in your inbox, an announcement of that. Otherwise, assume the next Empowering You webinar will be on the 23rd of April. And then there, you know, some of our coalitions are meeting in the meantime, the Affordable Housing Coalition next Monday, the Smart Sentencing Coalition on the 17th. And you can also follow that very important voting rights topic. You know, we saw already this week in a state that carried out their primary on Tuesday, the challenges of trying to do that with pandemic conditions going on. Some elections have been postponed in our state, and we don't know at this point how the August primaries will be impacted or the November general election necessarily. But it's important that we set up a system now so that people can vote by mail and make sure that every vote is counted and that proper security is used to keep the integrity of our elections going. So do take a look at the letter that we signed on to about voting measures. It's on the Joint Statements tab there at News and Updates. If you pick Joint Statements, you'll find one that we signed on with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. And then we'll have, there's a film to watch actually. If you go to the events for that Friday, April 17th session, there's a 30-some-odd minute movie to watch before you hear the speakers speak on the 17th. So allocate some time, cut out your Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or whatever it is that you're doing to fill some time and watch our video about voting rights for 30 to 40 minutes to be ready for the 17th so that we can have a good informed discussion on that topic because it's really important that we carry out our elections on schedule and with integrity and with every person getting to vote. We don't want to eliminate people with low incomes from being able to vote. We don't want to eliminate people who are health compromised from being able to vote. So let's make sure that we get the voting piece right this year. And let's get the census part right too. I will mention if you haven't filled out your census form yet, be sure and do that because we want to make sure that Missouri gets its fair share of congressional representatives and also funding from the federal government. So just a couple of reminders about voting in the census before we close for today. All right, thanks everybody for being with us, and we will keep you posted on anything that breaks that we think will be important to people living in poverty, those who are in the criminal justice system, and those who unfortunately are not receiving justice currently under the structural oppression that is there. We will talk with you later. Thanks for being with us today. Bye-bye.